So I want to welcome everybody, and we'll get started here. First, I'd like to introduce our board members that came to Stuttgart. I'm Sharice Knotts. I'm the Deputy Regional Vice President for Europe. I work for Black and Beach, and I'm thrilled to be here. And on my right,
I'm Chris Carlone. I'm the Membership Vice President. I work for WSP.
I'm Chandler Ogden with Jacobs. I'm the website and outreach coordinator.
and then we've got a lot of people here in the room. Appreciate that, and we've got even more online. So welcome everybody. So let's get started. Slides. This is our timeline today. And so I want to, again, it's great to see so many people here. We want to introduce SAME and our Europe region hosts. Next slide. Okay. You can see the SAME mission, Society of American Military Engineers mission, is to build leaders and lead collaboration among government and industry to develop multidisciplinary solutions to national security infrastructure challenges. Who knows the significance of that photograph? That's the Theodore Heuss Bridge in Wiesbaden. That was joining the U.S. and the German forces. And it's, I think it's in Mainz or Wiesbaden.
Okay, Mainz. That's the Mainz. Yeah.
Mainz. Thank you.
From the Mainz side.
Yeah. Now I would like to, next slide, I'd like to introduce our Europe region post. So we've got hopefully joining us today, the Kaiserslautern post, Rhein-Main post, UK post, and our Europe region. So nobody else could make it in person. So I would ask that as I introduce you, if you could come on camera, say hello and introduce yourself. Starting with the Kaiserslautern post is Colonel Rick Martin on.
You're on mute, sir.
Video.
I see his lips moving.
Now, hear me now?
Yep, loud and clear.
All right, perfect. So I'm working off of a laptop instead of my normal computer because for some reason Outlook won't work on my normal computer, which is great after coming off 8 days of leave. Anyway, so Colonel Rick Martin here. I just took over as the Kaiserslautern Post president. Super honored and humbled by the opportunity. Been a long time believer in the purpose of SAME. As I acknowledged in my newsflash article, my full disclosure, my participation has ebbed and flowed because I can't seem to hold a job and have PCS 15 times in my career. And every time I move, it's hard to catch up and keep up with a post. So super happy to get involved here in Europe. I took command of the Air Force Installation Mission Support Center Detachment 4 in August of last year. So coming up on my 1 year point, although I have been in Europe for the last few years because I was a group commander up in the UK prior to this current position. For those of you that have no idea what AFIMSC is, think EUCOM for the Army. So while it's different levels of responsibility because our installations don't fall under, whereas your garrison commanders fall under EUCOM, we're not set up that way here, but I'm essentially the equivalent and have many of the similar responsibilities as EUCOM Europe and with what Mr. Tommy Mize covers down. In fact, I have a phone call with him later this afternoon as we work on an engagement with our German government partners next week. Yeah, beyond that, that's probably all I have to offer. Super happy to be here. Happy Friday, and I wish you all a wonderful and safe weekend. Back over to you.
Thank you, sir. How about Lieutenant Colonel Dave Carlson? Are you online? All right, how about, he's the military vice president for the Kaiserslautern Post. How about Frank Lovett? Post civilian vice president.
Sharice, I think he's on leave based on his out of office.
He's in the south of France on a beach somewhere.
Oh, poor guy.
Yeah, I know. All right. Well, let's introduce the Rhein-Main Post. Scott Turrigan. Have you joined us?
Yes, hello. Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Hopefully. All right, great. So I'm also on leave, but I'm such a fan of SAME, I'm also not going to miss it. So yeah, about me, I'm with U.S. Army Europe and Africa in the G34 in the protection office, and I'm a civil engineer there. My role with SAME, I've been kind of actively involved with the Rhein-Main Post since 2018, and I've been serving as the post president for the past 2 years. So, also, just one note: I am riding a bus through Sweden right now. My flight was 2 hours delayed, so it might be a little awkward with my presentation later, but I'll make the best of it. Over.
Thank you, Scott. And how about Brian Osborne? I saw he was on.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Brian Osborne, Vice President for the Rhein-Main Post. Civilian, I work for CDM Smith, AE contractor. Scott's giving us a new example of working from anywhere. I love the mobile working. Looking forward to the presentation. I was at the JETC this year as well. Didn't seem to get much time to go to presentations. Lots of things going on there, but hope you all have a great meeting. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Brian. Now over to the UK Post. How about Post President Lieutenant Colonel Ryan McKinley? Are you on? For the Post Vice President, Kevin Jolly. Is anybody from the UK Post online?
I'm online, Sharice, Tom Heeson.
All right, Tom Heeson.
So hello, everyone. I'm Tom Heeson. I'm the Secretary of the UK Post. I'm a civilian working for Mott MacDonald, who are an AE firm, and I'm the technical manager for the USAF's 48 Fighter Wings F-35 bed down infrastructure program at Lakenheath. And yeah, I'll be talking a bit later on about my experiences from JETC.
Thank you, Tom. If you guys couldn't understand, he's speaking English. Good sport, Tom. Thanks.
Not worried about
Yeah. All right. So those are the three enduring posts in Europe, but in the Europe region, we also have the regional vice president, Chris Knudsen. I don't believe he was able to join. You already met me. I'm the deputy RVP. We have another deputy RVP, Chief Master Sergeant Adam Bugadev. Adam, were you able to join?
Hi, Sharice. This is Adam. I was able to join. I had some Teams issues, so you won't see me on video. I'm a caller, but happy to be here. And thank you for the introduction. I recently finished being an elected director on the national team, and just signed up to become the European region second deputy RVP. So happy to be here and bring my experiences from about SAME and JETC to everybody who's listening.
Thank you, Adam. And then our regional fellow POC is Al Luck, and I know he's out on the golf course today in a tournament, so we won't be seeing him. So if Colonel Martin, if you would turn your camera off, that'll help save some bandwidth. And then if we will.
You need to share.
Can't share. I need to share. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Cool. Gotta get this up right.
Over 3.
Right.
To the right 3.
There we go. Go, went down. Got that. Here. Look it up. Shows the entire. And so, get out. So.
There we go.
All right, so so I've introduced our post. Oh, put that in presentation mode or not?
It wasn't downloaded again. So you want
Web-based.
Okay, fine, that's fine.
Can you do it? If it's a lot of slides, we can do it now.
That's fine. That's fine. All right. Well, in addition to our post members, and we have a number of members here in the room with us today. We also want to acknowledge our sustaining members, and these are the companies and the organizations that support the post. So here we've got the Rhein-Main post sustaining members. Next slide is our Kaiserslautern sustaining members. And finally, our UK sustaining members. So SAME brings together a wide cross-section of industry and government partners. This is kind of our agenda today. This whole meeting came about, a meeting that we had. When was that, Gary? A couple months ago.
This time.
Yeah. That there used to be a post here in Stuttgart. I noticed the flag is still flying here. But one of the things that SAME wants to do is take SAME out to the regions or to the areas. Europe is unique because there's a lot of geographically separated places. So there's no reason we can't come to you. So the request was, gosh, we just don't have the bandwidth, the time to go to JETC. It would be great if we could get some feedback on the Joint Engineer Training Conference. So we're going to do that, but we'd also like to talk about, what is the value of being an SAME member, and what's the value of some of the events and the industry government engagement events that we have. We'll give some overview of some of the sessions at JETC. We had 20 people from the Europe region attend JETC this year. It was a lot of fun. And I wish I'd put the picture in front of the Alamo in the slide deck here, because that was a blast.
Therese,
and then
I'll drop that in the chat for you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. He's spot on. He's right on it. Thank you, Tom. Then we'll have an open discussion with with the folks here in the room on where SAME can support. Did you get it yet? Oh no! Stand by.
Don't tell me. I'm not going to show it. It seems like bandwidth.
But wait, there's more.
Am I connected still?
No, I think I took it over. Hopefully people can see. Can people online see the presentation?
We can, yes.
Yeah, I can.
Okay.
A little bit of
Just move forward and.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah.
just a couple of technology glitches.
In education. It's for sure.
Okay.
So we're sharing
Yeah.
that.
So they see it. I'll move the slides here, and you can move them.
You can move the slides.
Yeah.
Good check.
All right, so let's go to the next slide. And I would like to ask Jet Sedora and Ken Staley, if you're online, would you introduce yourselves and talk a little bit about the value of SAME membership?
Therese, I am here. I'm not sure if Jet is.
What slide are we on?
The value of SAME membership.
What up?
Okay, good. I can
There we
continue
go.
then, or I can start.
Yeah.
So good morning all. I'm Ken Staley from ECC. I am currently not on a bus in Sweden, a beach in France, or a golf course. But I will connect with Scott, Frank, and Al later. That is one of the benefits of SAME, is the networking. I joined SAME in 2009. At that time, I could barely spell DOD. Additionally, I'm an architect, so I was actually happy to hear that an engineering organization would actually allow me to be a part of it. I've been here for a member for many years. I actually joined the board, or began on the board in 2014. I'm still a member of the board. First for 2 posts, actually, and now currently for 1. I do hold one of the most boring positions on the board, which is to raise thousands of dollars for student programs every year by organizing golf outings. So I know it sounds terrible, but I keep coming back to do it. So the benefits of being a member of SAME for me definitely have been networking, partnering. I even take it another level, building relationships, friendships that last decades, learning something new, continuing education, solving problems. These are the things that I found at SAME. And so I think it's nice. It's a group of persons from very many backgrounds, environmental scientists, geologists, construction managers, planners, etc. Each one of us brings something to the table every single month. So that's it. Thank you all.
Thank you, Kim. So Jet did not make it. Adam, do you want to add anything to what Ken said?
Sure, I'll just jump in on that. Honestly, it comes down to whatever you want. You know, I find that most people, when they're looking at SAME, they're trying to figure out where they fit in. And in my experience, I found that whatever you're looking for, SAME has a place for you. If it's continuing your education and getting some type of license, or continuing to have your license so that you can keep getting continuing education hours, networking to find new jobs, networking to build your own profile up, partnering to build out your business if you're a small business, and if you're military, that transition part. Moving in and out of the military is not easy, and you know, SAME has plenty of resources for that. So all of those things, or if you know what, if you just want to be a volunteer and show up and hang out with some cool folks and do fun things, we have that for you too. So it's been an organization for over 100 years, and I hope if for anybody who's not a member, you can find yourself in it and jump in and see where we can make the post better.
Thank you, Adam. How many people in this room are members of SAME? Wow, this is great. So we'll be talking to you later. We raised his hand. All right, that's fantastic. So, Chandler, do you want to tell us a little bit about the events and the other things that
Sure.
are value of SAME? Next
Sure.
slide.
So as I mentioned when I made the introduction there, I'm the Rhein-Main and Kaiserslautern communications and outreach coordinator. I support the website in its current state. It's currently in transition. If you've gotten emails from either Sharice or from me, we continually apologize that we're in transition to a new format for the website. So bear with us on that. I did want to point out, you know, as I think the guys who just spoke mentioned, you know, there's something for everybody in SAME. I'm prior Air Force. I've been in the AE industry for 30 some odd years, and pretty much been in and out of SAME my whole career. I haven't done it continuously. It's kind of ebbed and flowed over time, but you know, really the opportunity, there's really something for everybody. There's social activities.
Can you advance
Oh,
the slide?
sorry. Yeah.
It's,
there we go.
yeah.
So there's social activities, there's technical activities, there's industry and government engagement. So there's an opportunity for the government, for industry to exchange ideas and industry. It's our job really to interface and to help the government be successful in achieving your mission. We got to be able to talk about that, and SAME is a great platform to be able to do that. All of the different items that we showed here, obviously the thing we're going to show a little bit today, for those of you who haven't heard about JETC, Joint Engineering Training Conference and Expo. It's an annual event that has really grown to be a marquee event for the engineering, all the engineers across the military. It's all services. It's not non-military. Even other governmental agencies have started to pick up memberships in SAME. And it's really a great opportunity to learn a lot about a lot. So there's dozens and dozens of different training sessions that we'll highlight a couple today. But it's also networking opportunities, presentations, and other events. The Post Leadership Workshop is a chance, if you do become active in SAME, always looking for volunteers. It's a 100% volunteer organization at the post level. So if you're interested in helping, we're always looking for people who would like to help. We do construction site visits. We do, I'm highlighting the middle of the slide here, the TORN process feedback. The TORNs, everybody's on the AE side of the house here, and a lot of the people in the military know what the TORN is, Task Order Requirements Notice. It's something that kind of evolved over the last couple of years. It's continually changed. In the Rhein-Main Post, we've partnered with the Europe District to really exchange opportunities and feedback on how we can make the process better for everybody. It's a huge burden on the government side, but it's also a burden on the AE side. So it's really a great opportunity to be able to talk about it and make it better. And we saw great improvements over the course of time. And as what I think most people who engage in the TORN world, that's even continued to evolve now as we moved into the new simplified process. We have communities of interest, young member socials. A young member in the eyes of SAME is 40 or below. And when we talk a little bit later about
that's almost everybody in this room, right?
Right. We're all really happy that it's a low bar or a high bar,
achievable bar.
And then again, maybe the last couple of things to mention here. Those of us in the industry, you're probably members, probably have professional certifications, have requirements to keep up with professional development hours and continuing education. And including today, every SAME monthly meeting that has a presentation generally offers a PDH. So you're able to get credit for your time here and get the network and meet lots of wonderful people.
And on that note, if anybody here needs continuing education credit or PDH, raise your hand and Chris will make sure you get a certificate. And those online that want or need it, just send an email to me or Chandler, and we'll get you a certificate.
And that's both PMP and
that is
PE?
correct.
Okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And then the last thing I'll notice, advance the slides one more. So again, as part of the website, we've all kind of adapted and become a little more nimble thanks to our friend the coronavirus. We were originally an all in-person membership organization. When I came and started being affiliated with the Rhein-Main Post, we figured out how to do the virtual meetings. So now pretty much all of our meetings are like this, where they're hybrid. We found that it's really an opportunity. Not everybody can make it to the meeting place to attend a meeting in person. We always still encourage that because it's a great opportunity to talk face to face. But we do try to do all the meetings virtual. And as a benefit of that, we record the meetings and we post them to a YouTube channel. And we also post archive of all of the slide presentations for our meetings. So the slide on the left is our typical Rhein-Main homepage. If you look on the homepage, there's the link that says Media Archive. The Media Archive has a link to a page that has each of the technical topics. So if you ever have a technical topic that you're curious about, we've probably done a presentation on it if it's pertinent to the military community. And there's probably slides that'll at least give you some information there if you like to go. And then we also have the YouTube channel where we actually post the membership meetings there, and golf tournaments and other things as well. So again, great opportunity. If you do, we'd love to see you in person. Can't make it in person, certainly come virtually. If you can't make it virtually, you have a chance to go see the information that we post up.
And those that do need PDH or CEU certificates, there's a link on the website for the blank one. If you go back and view one of those presentations, on structural proofing or on ICD 705 or whatever, you can download and complete the certificate yourself. It's, of course, all of us have to complete ethics as part of our licensing. So we trust that if you viewed it, you can take the certificate and complete it and turn it in. Yep.
Next slide.
Okay. All right. So what I wanted to get was some impressions. As I said, we had about 20 people attend JETC this year. It was awesome. So I know Gianna Warner, has she joined? Tom Heesum, Jet Sonora, Adam Bubina, they were going to touch on these, on some of these points on what their impressions of JETC were. So Tom, I know you're on. Adam, I know you're on. What about Gianna and Jet? No shows. Probably technical difficulties.
Yeah, I think Jet's been having issues with his USAF login. Yeah, with his move over to move over the channel. So,
well,
do you want me to start off?
Tom is one of our young professionals. He's in the leader development program, and he also participated in post leader workshop, and he came to JETC this year. And so, Tom, why don't you tell us what some of your impressions were?
Yep. Yeah. Thanks, Charisse. So, yeah, I'm the Europe region's representative for the SAME Leader Development Program for 2023-24. There's a number of people from the region who you're probably familiar with, have been on it before. So Scott, who's the Rhein-Main post president, did it maybe 3 years ago, and Adam, who'll be speaking after me, was in the graduating class. Yeah, I'm the Europe representative for this year coming in. So we started the program at JETC this year. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Leader Development Program, it's a year-long commitment. It's funded entirely by SAME, which is great, particularly being based outside of the US. Their funding for the airfare was much appreciated, and it aims to support the development of the next generation of military, government, and industry leaders through a curriculum of training, study, and networking opportunities. So I started the program a month and a half ago out in Texas. It's split into 3 real themes of know yourself, know your team, and then know your future. There's to build our leadership capability. Recognizing that understanding yourself is the key to improving and the way you behave in situations and leading. So at JETC we had 2 full days of training delivered by a career coach who's a former naval aviator. So you're very, very familiar with the US military, of course. And that was on knowing ourselves. So that involved various training sessions, some personality tests like the Myers-Briggs type indicator, if you're familiar with that, and another one. And then following on from that, we are free to attend the rest of the conference. That was a really great experience. As someone working on US projects outside of the US, it was great to link up and see what's happening in the continental US and the huge breadth of projects, and be able to attend some of the sessions, including those that will be discussed later, and learn from the work the US forces are doing across the world. And then following on from that, as part of the Leader Development Program, we have 2 calls a month to deliver training over Teams, because we're quite geographically diverse. There's people on the course out of Hawaii, and then also people serving in the Air Force out of the bases in Turkey and Korea. So yeah, we have our calls on Teams. We also do a project that we'll be deciding on over the summer, working in teams to further the society and also the society's causes. And then that we'll have some more training in person at JETC next year in Florida, where, yeah, hopefully I'll see lots of the people who are in this call. Yeah, I just found it a really, really valuable experience so far. And yeah, hopefully, yeah, I'll be able to tell you in a year's time more things that I've really benefited from as I graduate from the program. And yeah, just one other thing I touched on, I've mentioned the value of all the training sessions, the technical expertise. There's also courses on training sessions on leadership and other aspects, which are really useful. And the networking opportunities as well were just great to meet other companies and build contacts. That's something I've been able to lean on and bring back from the conference and use to support the F-35 program mission at Lakenheath. And yeah, I'm looking to continue building that. Yeah, thanks, Sharice. Unless there was anything else.
Thank you, Tom. Now we look forward to you being a future leader with SAME. Adam, do you want to talk about some of the impressions and value you took away from JETC?
Yeah, absolutely. And granted, so this wasn't my first time. I think I'm like 8 or 9 JETCs in at this point, but I can say I definitely remember my first experience. It can feel very overwhelming for anybody who's never gone. It's really hard to get yourself oriented. And then you look at the schedule and there's so many sessions that you're like, you have to try to get to all of them. And you're in the middle of doing that and going to the exhibit hall and all your friends that you'll run into. It's great. But one of the things they added recently, and I think this is over the course of like the last 4 years, is new or first time JETC, like there's a welcome program. So for anybody who's never gone, if you have the chance, you'll get asked when you register if this is your first time and if you'd like to join in a special networking event just for you. And they link you up with people that have been to 3 or more JETC events, and they do the same for Small Business Conference. So I'd encourage you to jump into that because it really gets you a head start on how to make the most value out of the time that you're going to have in the conference, because usually it's very limited and things go very, very fast. But just moving on to COI. If you don't know, COI stands for Community of Interest. And across the society, there's 17 of them. Now, I'm not going to talk about every single one of them. And essentially what it is, we used to have committees, we used to have councils in SAME, and we decided collectively that we can't tell the difference. So we called them all communities of interest. Pretty much meaning, if you really like this topic, go join in. If you're an architect, you go to the architecture COI, right? If you like construction, if you like K through 12 engagement, each of these little areas have specific things that they get together and they talk about like a community of practice. The value they bring is just leader engagement. If you have issues in your different areas or things you want to bring up, remember the mission of the organization is get after national infrastructure and how do we create more engineers. They create PDSs, webinars, and they're pretty much banks of knowledge that you can dive into and help solve the problems that you're working on. You know, some of the ones that I want to highlight, the Joint Engineer Contingency Operations, COI, they always talk about big projects in contingency locations, and they usually have a presentation on the challenges they faced, how they overcame them, and how they executed despite all of those challenges. Every single JETC I've ever been to, that's a big highlight of the visit. They've done tabletops before, and all of these COIs have monthly meetings that you're free to join in on or be on their newsletters without any commitment to a position or time. The only thing you have to do that is log into your profile, find where it says which COIs would you want to join, and hit join. Pretty simple. Another one I'd like to talk about is camps, the engineering and construction camps. There's a COI that runs all of that, and not only the ones for national, but to help posts be empowered to do them at the local level. A big one that's getting a lot of attention recently is the resilience COI, and that's I know some people in the military hear resilience and it's like the big R word, and they think that it's something about emotional intelligence. It is not. This is more about infrastructure resilience and how do we build better buildings, better utility systems, better infrastructure, and make it to where it can survive the worst disasters. Upcoming on that is also the cyber realm. And then in a more people-based, we have young professional and enlisted COIs. One of the big things that the enlisted COI is working on is supporting programs for transitioning military members. And the young professionals have recently started up or put more effort into what they call CAP, or Credentialing Assistance Program. So if you were to, say, get your PMP or some other type of certification or license, and you're an SAME member, you can put in an application and they'll reimburse you for your exam fees. So all good things. And then I think we touched on leader development program, but they have their own COI as well that manages that program. Standing by
Thank
for
you,
any
Adam.
questions.
Well, let's hear from somebody who went to JETC for the very first time ever. Larry?
Certainly. Good morning, everybody. Hopefully you can see my camera. So yeah, I was there as a presenter, and that was my first time at JETC. I was also last November the first time at the Small Business Conference, SBC, which we've talked a lot about JETC, but I would also throw the plug in for SBC. It's not just small businesses, but the number of times overall, my biggest impression was the opportunities for partnering, networking. Obviously, there's a lot of educational activities, of course, and I was part of that. But for me, it wasn't only the educational parts from a purely technical perspective. It was also some of the more soft skills. So that is unique, I think, to JETC and to SAME as well. I'm part of other technical organizations, and the presentations tend to be heavily technical. This one branches out a little bit beyond just some of the pure technical stuff. At the same time, the networking, the number of times I heard partnering, and that word partnering during the week was amazing. And there truly is the desire. A lot of people, I can tell you, my company particularly, as well, we send people there specifically to talk to our partners and find new partners and things like that. So it's the networking opportunities there. JETC and SAME really work towards that, including like even at lunches, like they offer the lunch, and I've been to other conferences and that's unique, and it's pretty much a full lunch. And that's unique. Same thing with, I believe, breakfast. So to me, I'll keep it short, but that was the biggest things. Everybody's friendly, everybody's willing to talk, and just it's just a really good time.
Thanks, Larry. So next slide. One of the, I reached out to the folks here at EUCOM and AFRICOM, and I said, of all of the sessions that they had at JETC, which ones are the most interesting to you? And they provided these 6, and then our membership added a couple more. And passing the agenda around so you can see everything that was offered. So these 6 topics, plus the 2 additional ones, and they're on the next slide, but just leave this up for now. I brought 3 hard copies of those if you wanted to take a copy of the slides with you, or you can send me an email and I will email you the presentations. The recordings for those sessions are also available on the SAME website, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But some of the overviews we've asked some of the people that attended to give a short overview, with the key takeaways, what the value of the particular session was for them. The first one was on humanitarian design in the developing world, and that Jet Sidoro was going to present, and it sounds like he was not able to join us. So, as I said, I've got the presentation here if you guys want to get a copy of that. I don't think anybody from our group attended the remote airfield repair, either the one from, actually, I think I did sit in on the one from AFCENT, or the airfields and mission, a look at damage assessment, damage repair, and those responsible. But we do have Larry, who you just met, who was the presenter on the subtle art of tackling design and construction overseas, and Scott, who's on a bus in Sweden, who can give us an overview of improving diplomatic mission resilience to national hazards. So let's go to the next slide. And Larry, you want to try to give us a 5 to 10 minute overview of the subtle art of tackling design and construction overseas?
I sure can. So this was, it's the exercise in how do you condense a 45 to 50 minute presentation down to 5 minutes. So this is what I did. I grabbed the basic bullet points. I'm not going to obviously read them all. You guys are perfectly capable of reading, but at the same time, these are things that I'm sure most of the people in the Europe region have ran into. Anybody that's worked overseas for a long enough time has hit some of this stuff, and we've all encountered some similar problems. It's always amazing to me after the presentation when a ton of people come up and talk to me about similar issues and similar experiences or other things. Each one of these topics could easily be a presentation in itself. So the biggest thing, though, is it is a different type of challenge. It's a rewarding challenge, but it takes some special attention. The very big picture perspectives that I offer at the very beginning is that think and act like a global company. If you act like a U.S. company that works overseas, you're going to struggle. And the reason why is you will come off as I'm overseeing you and you're going to do the work and you're going to do it my way instead of a partnership. And generally you will get pushback and you won't get the full effect and you'll struggle. At the same time, your experiences, a lot of people are like, oh, I've done a bunch of work over in China. Is that, can I do work in Europe? And for the most part, yes. There are some very unique differences that you need to learn. So if you're working with CNOW versus, somewhere with NAVFAC, somewhere else or whatever, yes, there are unique differences. But in general, the FAR is the FAR and various other clauses and things like that. So there's really, just given the timing, there's some route to markets that I always talk about, and there's different execution models. So understand that, like with the execution models, partnering is typically required. It's just something that if you either need to be extremely experienced in a region as a US-based company or even a foreign firm. So like the project I'm currently on, we have a UK firm that is the contractor, but they've partnered with local host nation, local contractors. And so if you're not partnering, you're going to miss out. And the reason why is you both bring something to the table. One is the U.S. firm understands U.S. government work, how to deal with the FAR, how to deal with the UFGSs, various standard specs, the processing, the intense focus on submittals, paperwork, all the safety submittals and quality reports and things like that, that typically a foreign firm just struggles with, and they just don't understand that. But the flip side of that coin is the U.S. firm does not understand local execution methods, some of the means and methods that they do locally, how to work with the local nationals, language barriers, base access. Base access can be a huge problem. If you can't get on base, you ain't working. Okay, so that's something that you need to be thinking about early. And there is a lot of stuff I list in here that says you need to be thinking about it early and understanding you can't do everything at once, of course, but identifying your key stakeholders, who's going to be doing what, getting your initial submittals done, setting the quality of those initial submittals, because very often the government will review those a little bit harder than you're going to review maybe the ones at the end of the project, just simply trying to set that standard. At the same time, cost estimating, I don't want to forget cost estimating. And the reason why is cost area factors can be a problem, or area cost factors, depending upon how you say it, can be a problem. I recently was working with on a different project on some IGE stuff. And as we start looking at it, they hadn't adjusted for US rates versus the host nation rates of the labor. And I happen to know it's a good 4 to 5 times different. And that affects their cost. They were extremely high, didn't think they could do the project. And we're like, well, yeah, but go ask a local contractor what they pay and they'll give you a better cost. So again, partnering, base access, difference in design standards, that is an entire presentation in and of itself. But things like life safety codes, the government takes very seriously. And so we typically need to find the happy medium, but on life safety, we tend to go with worst case. So I'm currently on a project in Poland, and they, for instance, have more stringent fall protection requirements for when you're on a roof compared to OSHA and the Navy standards and things like that. So we have to go with most strict, and we find our way through it. We talk about it. Fire protection is a very common one. Environmental is another common one because your waste on a base, even though you might be on a U.S. base, might eventually seep off that base. So the host nation cares. Any rate, so I don't want to get too much into this, but the only other thing I'll mention is EDI, PPI, that kind of stuff. Hopefully you guys are familiar with those acronyms. They're big business right now in Poland and throughout Europe, and only going to get bigger. So my partner in this presentation, he's very familiar with these particular programs that the U.S. government has, and they're expanding, especially once Ukraine is settled back down. I hear quite a bit of discussion about what's going to go on in Ukraine. So things to keep attention to. Charisse?
I was the moderator for this session at JETC.
She was an awesome moderator.
And we had, it was a panel. We had government and industry presenting, and we got a lot of interaction from the people in the audience asking questions, and which is that's the number one goal that SAME has, is industry government engagement, and how do we solve problems. I mean, what you do in Poland is unique. It's not going to work in Djibouti. It's so that's so I mean we tried to do a big cross section. It was primarily focused over here in this theater, EUCOM and AFRICOM, but it could be anywhere. So,
and Charisse, one thing I'd add to that actually is, we had and I forget what the topic was exactly, but it came up in, and you might even remember what it was, but an audience member raised the concern of how do you deal with XYZ? And I said, yeah, that's a challenge. That's a tough one. Here's what we do. And my partner with the government was somewhat of a surprise that was a concern and an issue.
Yeah.
And so after the presentation, we talked for, 20 minutes about that with the audience member. And so again, it was a great engagement and great experience of back and forth. And they said, oh, well, maybe we need to set up an industry engagement talk or discussion to try to work through some of that. And I'm forgetting, it was something with contracting. I'm forgetting what exactly it was.
The topic was VAT.
VAT, that's right.
And I see all of the contractors here burying their head in their hand. Because it's different in each country, where you've got the DCA or where with the Defense Cooperative Agreement or the implementing agreements, and they're not everywhere.
Yeah,
and we're now pointing fingers at you.
Yes.
And some countries have a short fuse, short timeline. You must get that through in 30 days. Some countries you can take years. And anyway, so that is a topic that came out of this session, and it will be a topic of another industry government engagement. And
I'll say this is Rob Hanks from EUCOM. So I work under the bilat lane, the infrastructure piece, and how do we implement the procedures to do what it says in the defense cooperation agreements, right? And those agreements that are binding international agreements between another nation by the State Department and OSD and the members of the other nation.
Yeah.
So I get the infrastructure lane, but I pay very close attention to the tax lane because it affects directly our projects are the biggest things that hit in those countries as far as tax codes as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, there are active discussions going on all the way back to the State Department level.
right?
Yeah, and
Right.
just as an example, this morning I'm dealing with a VAT problem because if we don't get the certificate by today, the rental car company is going to be charging us VAT, which is another 30% or 28%, I think it is. So, you know, these are critical hits to bottom lines and things like that. So very important stuff.
All right. The next session overview, Scott Churigan, are you still with us?
Yep. Yes, I am.
All right.
And
So I don't know that if you can see the screen. We'll try to advance as
Yeah.
best we can.
Yep, I can see the screen. Thank you.
Okay, good.
Cool. Yep, and I see the first slide now. So, yes, again, my job is I'm a civil engineer with the U.S. Army Europe and Africa Protection Office, G34. Specifically, I'm in their assessments section. So that was my interest in this presentation, why I attended this specific one, improving diplomatic mission resilience to natural hazards. Some of you with EUCOM and AFRICOM may be familiar with the DoD's mission assurance assessments methodology and how we assess our critical assets throughout the world. That's kind of a big part of my work. So I was curious to see how the Department of State is similar doing it with their methodology and what lessons I could learn from it. So I saw that was an interest of yours, and I'm happy to share it. Again, it was a 50-minute presentation. You can watch the full thing by the subject matter experts online at the links provided and the full slides. But yeah, I've cut down, I guess, still a lot of the key slides, but I'm just going to hit very short bullets for each one. So next slide, please. So first of all, this is who presented. It was one individual from the Department of State. He's kind of the head of this new department within the Department of State. It's the Department's the Climate Security and Resilience Program. And then they also have some support from Stantec at the moment. And so it was a presenter from there as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so one key thing here is that the Overseas Building Operations entity of the Department of State, they're the ones that manage all of the properties for the Department of State around the world. And the big part is that they're all overseas properties. So I just thought that's also relates to kind of our mission and unique challenges with EUCOM and AFRICOM. It's all overseas properties and all the complications that brings. Next slide, please. So there's probably some lag, so I guess I'll wait till the slide goes. All right, so of all these properties, it's 287 locations, and at all those locations, it's 25,000 specific properties. And then you can see the breakdown there. Of those 25,000 properties, about 16,500 are residences, almost 900 office buildings, with a total value of property at 75 billion. So yeah, 25,000 buildings. It's a lot to account for. Next slide, please. And so with all their buildings that they're constructing and managing, I mean, these are the three goals that they try to govern, all they're doing with them: security, resilience, and stewardship. And then so resilience is kind of where this program is getting into. Next slide, please. So this just shows the evolution again of this new program at the Department of State. First of all, it was in 1982 they were starting to just address how earthquakes address their Department of State properties. But then in 2005 they had when there was the 2004 Indian Ocean earthquake and tsunami, that was their wake-up call that just looking at earthquakes is not enough. They also need to account for other things like tsunamis, tropical cyclones, geohazards, and flooding, and how these natural hazards affect their properties throughout the world, and how they can be better prepared to save lives and continue mission throughout these natural weather events. Next slide, please. I'm sorry. Well, the last thing is though, in 2005 they realized this need. They started looking at these other natural hazards, but as in their impression was that it was just a bunch of studies that they were funding and getting some interesting information, but not really doing anything with it. It wasn't turning into actionable items. So then in 2020, they finally had this big new push to have a proactive effort towards resilience, especially with the climate security aspect. They then accounted for 7 or more hazards, and that's when they stood up this specific program, this new team to take this focused look at it. So next slide, please. So for assessing the natural hazard at all of their sites, it's all over the world, as we saw, 25,000 properties to almost 200 locations. It's data. There's tons of data out there. So they're really relying on kind of like GIS information and pulling data together to really start to understand what the hazard is from their property to their properties. And this is just a highlight of some of these many resources that they're pulling data from to start doing their assessments. So next slide, please. So this is a map showing the kind of locations, the overseas locations throughout the globe. And the key thing to see here is that of the locations they're at, a lot of them are in quite dangerous places. I mean, we see 6 of the 10 deadliest earthquakes, 7 of the 10 deadliest floods locations. So the point is that these diplomatic facilities have lots of exposure, and also that the hazards that they're exposed to in these locations around the world are not actually so common in the US. So that's another unique challenge. Next slide, please, just to now have some examples of the hazards and the effects. So this was an example in Haiti. We all know this earthquake and the effects, but so how the embassy was affected by that 7 magnitude earthquake was, luckily the embassy compound was not so damaged, but they did, and there weren't too many fatalities from the Department of State side, but yeah, they lost over 50% of their residences. So obviously that has a huge ability on and maybe they still have their office space, but without housing, it's definitely impacts your mission. Next slide, please. And then this one is showing a Hurricane Irma and its effect on the diplomatic facility in Cuba. So they just had storm surge flooding, but a lot of damages happened from that. Well, I mean, with the wind, they had damaged facade, but the thing I found interesting from the security background is these connexes, weren't properly tied down and became buoyant and then floated around, not only damaging the building but also taking down the security fence, which I highlighted. So now you have a perimeter security vulnerability, also in a extreme time. So these are things to account for. Next slide, please. So 25,000 properties. I don't even know how many the DoD has, but yeah, probably way more, but we can appreciate this problem. So we have 25,000 properties. We want to improve their resilience to natural hazards, but where do you start with such a huge quantity? Next slide, please. So this was the kind of the methodology. This next section is going to the methodology of how to itemize these 25,000 properties and how to know where to start to make efforts to understand the hazard and where to start investing money to make the most improvements. So they decided with their methodology to have 3 key indicators, one being just overall exposure, based on where the facility is, what kind of events are they vulnerable to, and of those events, how severe is it? Is it just typically Category 1 hurricanes, or do they often get Category 5? And then also the vulnerability of the structure. Maybe the construction in some location, the quality, because of the local standards and materials and building practices, it's much better, and the facilities are capable of withstanding these hurricanes, whereas in other locations, it must be less strong construction, and they'll be much more vulnerable to any negative effects. Next slide, please. So here we get to see a bit of the Department of State math. But basically, they're going to calculate the risk for their facility, for their locations, through an exposure score, a severity score, and then from that they modify it with a vulnerability multiplier. And that's what they'll use to calculate a risk score for each location. So next slide, please. So this is how they developed their exposure score. We talked about all the available data that's out there for wind, hurricanes, heat. They basically use GIS and have all these overlay maps, and are able to then kind of assign a single exposure score for each property footprint within a country, just by overlaying all these different natural hazards on top of each other for kind of one single exposure score. Next slide, please. The next indicator was that severity score. And then, so this is a matter of, first of all, how important is the mission that's happening in that location relative to other Department of State missions. Next of all is, how many people are there, family members, and also the replacement value. Yeah, and you can go on to the next slide, please. Monthly cost. So this shows how they kind of quantified these considerations to understand the severity. So just using historical data of events in those locations, there, for example, coastal flooding in that time period, in the past 50 years. Yeah, they quantify how many fatalities there typically were per event, and then also the damage per event, as you see on the right side. And one interesting thing to notice here is that some events like extreme heat can be very, very dangerous for people, but not for facilities. So you see it's the deaths and the extreme heat and the damage per event, and the weight factors that are assigned to them. So and kind of the same for wind. All right, so we understand the exposure score and the severity score of that, and then the last step is the vulnerability. So we go next slide, please. And this is how they come up with the vulnerability indicator. We talked about the facility condition, like on the top left, or evaluation logistics. Maybe if they're able to get everyone out quite easily before an event, maybe they're not so vulnerable, at least for the human aspect of it. Or, for example, on the right, access to water and things after an event. If the country is able to quickly rebound, even though they might be vulnerable to these big events, if the country can quickly get back on its feet, it's overall the mission is not as vulnerable. So these are the considerations they account for, then come up with their vulnerability indicator. Next slide, please. So this is just a recap of that Department of State methodology for how they're calculating risk. We just talked through the exposure score, what kind of events and how likely to occur, how bad will they be when they occur, and then how vulnerable are the facilities and people when it does occur. And so with that, they get a risk score. Next slide, please. So then for all of these events, their approach was to sum them up to get a total risk score, as we see on the right, for each post. So all those different natural hazards they're looking for, they simply sum them up to get a total risk score. And they're doing that for all posts, not doing for individual buildings. It's just post locations. Next slide, please. And now this allows them to rank them relative to each other, so they can understand, what posts are at the most risk, and where it might be the best place to start focusing effort and money to address them and lower risk. So next slide, please. And this shows the overall spread of risk at all of their locations. And with this, we can also kind of see that it makes sense. We see Manila as being like the most risk on the left. Makes sense with its location, earthquakes, hurricane, typhoon, extreme wind type events, perhaps heat. So it kind of makes sense. Whereas London, we see kind of in the middle, and so it kind of passes the sanity test. And then they break it into percentiles, which allows them to have kind of focus groups for what they're addressing. And then you see two areas here are called out, San Salvador and Tunis, in this 90th percentile risk range. We're going to talk about them a bit later, but that's why I'm just pointing out here that's why these are high risk locations that they're going to look at later. Next slide, please. So I think that was a key part of what I wanted to explain, was the Department of State's methodology that they're developing for how to quantify risk to all of their locations, and so where they know where to start looking at and where to focus. So that was calculating the risk for that, and then ranking them relative to each other. The next part of this is now actually doing some kind of on-ground assessments and then creating adaptation studies with possible kind of solutions to lower risk. These I'll go more fast through just for the sake of time, and also it's a process that's more straightforward and familiar. So next slide, please. First of all, Department of State, shout out to the DoD. They used our some of our manuals for their work. So basically, they wanted to develop adaptation, resilience, assessment, analysis, and create these studies for their posts. And they did 2 pilot studies at San Salvador and Tunis, as we discussed. And these were the 2 DoD manuals they used. Is there a comment? I'm sorry. Nope. Okay, so just going on then, is that next slide, please? So basically, the process here for doing these assessments is to, first of all, establish the scope of the assessment for each place, and then once you're on ground, identify possible alternatives, and solutions to problems they find, and then calculate the cost benefits of those different alternatives, and then from there assemble a portfolio of action alternatives for that post, and then things they can, a plan they can use going forward to how to start reducing their risk and improve their resilience. Next slide, please. And next slide. So this process is pretty similar to how the DoD does our assessments as well, our mission assurance assessments. But basically, beforehand, gather all the data you can. That's site maps, historical data from weather events or other types of events. Have a questionnaire, do whatever pre-visit interviews you can for the stakeholders, but then interview all you can and get data beforehand. That way, next slide, please. That way, before you arrive to the limited on-ground assessment, you already have a good understanding of the, what the hazards are, what the key missions are, what infrastructure those key missions depend upon, where those infrastructure pieces are, where those utility connections are, and then you make the most of that limited on-ground time, not learning any of that once on your own site. So they chose to do a 5-day assessment, which they feel is too short, but that's what they're going with. Next slide, please. And then once they're on site, basically they give an in-brief with all the stakeholders explaining, why they're there, who they need to meet with, and then they go off and do their interviews with all the different subject matter experts to actually better understand the infrastructure they're studying beforehand, learn for all the firsthand knowledge from the people that are working those systems or responsible or have lived through different events and knowledgeable. Next slide, please. Sorry, somebody yelling in the background here. So after the assessment, that's when they then develop their observations, identify what risks exist, where infrastructure is vulnerable, where there could be hazard to humans or damage to infrastructure that could affect mission, and they then develop possible solutions to fix them. I don't know if it's listed on here on this slide, but that's when they also then do the cost benefit analysis to see is it actually worth it, even though it is vulnerable to do it, and then they can create this overall adaptation alternative projects that then the facility can pursue each year after year. Next slide, please. So this is just a summary of some of the key results from the assessment at San Salvador. You see that they found some new hazards from landslides. They found that some of the buildings weren't to building code, so they'd be more vulnerable in an event. They found a need for a drainage survey, and also a need to have some HVAC protection from volcanic ash. Next slide, please. And then at Tunis, I guess one key finding there was that with water scarcity events, they have very limited response options. It's just not available. There's just no way for them to actually get it. Whereas in other countries, it might be easier. They might have other methods. So one of the things they're proposing was to have like atmospheric water generators on site. Next slide, please. So the key point of this, the next two slides is I'm not going to go through the bullets, but that, with after the conclusion of the assessment and these reports that they're writing, basically they're identifying one, actual physical projects that can reduce their risk to these natural hazards. And then next slide, but also just things they can do differently, different ways of doing operations or management or preparedness, just different operations that can also reduce risk. Next slide, please. And then, so I walked you through the methodology for how they determine risk to their posts, and then how they do the assessments to then identify possible solutions to reduce that risk. And then of their lessons learned, they're listed here, but it seemed like the big thing they were harping on is the importance of the data. Because yeah, that's what's driving all those indicator scores in the very beginning. Yeah, there's locations all over the world, and it's just that data that they're really depending on to start quantifying the risk. So with that, I can try to answer if there's any questions in the room, and of course the points of contact, for this material was listed in that first slide or two. You can reach out to. So open it to the room. Thank you.
I think that was really interesting. I do have a copy of the full slide deck if anybody wants one. And if you send me an email, I can send you a link to the session recording. This, of course, is this session is supposed to be recorded. I brought 3 hard copies. For anybody interested. And again, send me an email. I'll be happy to just mail it to you. That was really interesting, Scott. I mean, they've got quite a process.
Yeah, the one thing I found interesting though is that the Department of Defense, the Defense Threat Reduction Agency has already put a ton of work into developing our own methodology. So I found it quite interesting that they're starting anew and their own methodology. So afterwards, I mean, immediately afterwards, I had some questions for them, in the session, but then there was a lot of follow-up discussions about the methodology. And so there's still conversations happening in the background. I've connected the people that made the ditcher one. It sounds like just, and hopefully they don't have to totally reinvent the wheel. They can use a lot of the DoD's methodology because we've been doing a lot of work in this for years, and no need to reinvent the wheel.
Anybody have any thoughts or comments? I failed to mention, I also have copies of the Subtle Art of Design and Construction, if anybody wants a hard copy of that.
I'm curious on previous topic. Most of you are doing work in the European theater. If you had to name kind of the biggest challenge you guys often run into, what would that be in executing work efficiently here?
You got a lot of industry people here. I would agree with what Chandler said. I think it's the partnerships, and I think Larry mentioned that. Maybe once he gets rejoined, he can talk about that. Is having partnerships with the locals that know how to get the permitting done, know the secret handshake, know how to get access, understand what materials are available in that country, or what you can and can't, what you can and can't do.
Point, understanding the local code versus USC, that always challenge. There's always which one is the applied, but it also depends on so far, so the status of forces agreement between the two countries, so certain elements prevail versus the other. Actually cooperate, as they mentioned, that's definitely a challenge. Again, working in Europe, even though we say in some cases European Union, the European Union is something that has a lot of differences in each country you work on. Then if it goes outside the European Union, that's more challenging because changes. Maybe there's no established forces agreement. So there's no sometimes clear cut agreements on how the U.S. forces interact with the local regulation.
I think one of the codes that, you know, it's a challenge pretty much everywhere is fire protection. We heard that here. I mean, here in Germany, you're just going to have to do both. On the construction side, what are the challenges that you see?
I would say compliance between the host nation and the US regulation is starting from the design phase. It's always the most critical.
And even on top of that, depending on what country you're talking about, if it's a country where it's new to doing a joint agreement and you're following new ground, permit officials half the time don't know the rules that they have to follow, or things haven't really been worked out in process, and it's just hard. It's hard to move things forward. People basically, even if you get to the right people and you have the conversation, everybody wants to move things forward. They just don't have a process in place in early expeditionary type engagement.
So is there something you think that the government could do to try and help streamline project execution? Or, you know, these essentially, I mean, you're obviously, whenever you talk about different cultures, you're going to run into issues, but you know, from a government facilitation standpoint, are there improvements that you guys would like to see or recommendations in how the government executes projects overseas?
I think it's an excellent question.
I'll offer something. I approach from a slightly different perspective. We deal with secure installation that focus on technicals, which basically requires U.S. citizens for a while. And to get a presence in country is really dependent upon your workload over time. And so when you bid projects, you probably, unless you've got a lot of work over here already, you're bidding back to the States, so it's going to raise the cost of government. If you do have enough work to keep the workforce over here permanently, the government can do to help is a lot of times the contracts don't necessarily come with educational funding for if I'm going to bring my family over and I want to put them in U.S. schools. Does the government want to pay that? But at the same time, you know, if you're going to get a wider swath of U.S. citizens to uproot themselves, many of them don't have military experience and go somewhere else around the world. They're looking for those base comforts. They're looking for the U.S. comforts to include activity in schools or international schools. So it's from the DoD side, it's opening your minds to understanding how somebody who isn't DoD based can come over and incentives to get them to move so they're closer to the work site and get you better quality and most timely response.
I think the defense cooperation agreements and implementing arrangements are very important. I know sometimes they're in place, but then when you go to execute a project, thank you, Gary. Yeah.
I'll give you an example. In Romania, we did an IA, and I'm sure Trey was part of the process. The IA was incomplete enough to execute and track in accordance with both host nation and U.S. So they did an addendum to the IA. They didn't massage them and merge them together. So you have two incomplete process IAs that, when merged, make complete sense. But if you're just trying to read it and follow it, it is difficult for any contractor, you know, to work their way through that process, let alone the service components, et cetera. No, it's can be very difficult.
Can be.
So on your point, just thinking about it a little bit, you guys primarily competing under MATOC, SATOCs. I can understand on a MATOC, right, where you're all competing for the same opportunities, it can be hard to plan your workforce. A SATOC can probably provide a little more stability. But what are your experiences in both, pros and cons? Do you, obviously the government likes the competition of a MATOC, right? But,
So, like probably most of the big firms that do work here, we have both. SATOCs are always more desirable from the perspective that we can be more of a partner. Just the process of having MATOC, fair and equal competition, requires the government to be a little more reserved in what they're willing to talk about and share. So the ability to help craft a jointly developed scope is harder. We've always found that that's a better outcome for everybody if you're able to have the discussion so that it's understanding, but also just maybe getting new thinking into how you want to execute a project. Maybe something that when the government person who authored a scope may not have thought about all the things that somebody on the industry side would have thought of. Anytime you can have that interaction, it's great.
So with a SATOC though, would it give you the mechanism to make a business decision that says we're going to move families? Or it obviously still depends on workload. You get a SATOC and still not do any work under it, but it's a tough hurdle to pass, when it's a business decision on taking care of families, which the government can't write that, really write that into a scope.
Correct. Yeah.
To get a SATOC, you pretty much have to be here. You're not going to come from outside in on a SATOC. You come in on an IDIQ and you'll learn the location. But NAVFAC does a lot of SATOCs. Now they skip the touring process as a result, and it saves them 6 weeks every time they want to do something. So there's benefits. But then on the IDIQs, and a lot of us work together, competitors, depend on the project. I think the biggest thing that we enjoy is IG events where we have a discussion of this is coming, this is the problem as a community, what do you guys see? And we have a collaboration openly at a table. And by doing that, you don't get the wild cards that have never worked on us and then show up and say, oh, you got that to deal with? You don't want that, because that doesn't help anybody, industry or government, to get the mission done and move to the next one. So we welcome IGE events.
I think if we could skip ahead 2 slides, we're doing exactly what we were going to do next. Now, but we had 2 other presentations that we were going to give, but nobody was here to do those. So again, I do have copies on ICD 705, and I've got copies of the from concept to lasting impact, and you're welcome to take those or send me an email for those. But what we really want to do is this dialogue that we're having here, the questions that you're asking, sir, and the comments that you're making. How do we get industry and government at the table? And you hear what our challenges are, we hear what your challenges are, and how can we solve those together? So,
one comment I have is, development of scope of project. That's really because helps us. The more detailed, the more discussion up front we can have about the scope of the project and how well it's developed, and takes into account the differences of doing work in Germany versus Poland versus the Baltic states or Italy.
I was just going to say, as an example of an IG that works. So once a year, the Europe district in Wiesbaden will hold a program review, and we always use that as an opportunity to talk about specific things. That was an example where, previously one of the common concerns was we'd get a torn. It's like 3 sentences. It's not enough to really understand the project. So we struggle as industry to be able to be responsive and go, yeah, I can do exactly that, and here's good examples, which makes the selection process go easier, et cetera, et cetera. Additionally, in the actual responding to RFPs, the government or the Europe district is taking the point where now they will hold a pre-proposal conference to have that discussion, they've generally already roughed out their scope, but having the opportunity to have that dialogue before we put a bunch of effort into a proposal that's not what they ultimately want, having the chance to talk about it has been great. And that came directly out of the IGEs and the chance to have the dialogue between the industry and the government. So just an example that it's a good outcome from SAME.
I'd continue on that specific engagement. The slides that are made available, each country has their own IDIQ per Europe district. We can look at those and figure out what programs are coming. One, you get a better 330 response, and two, we make sure it's the type of work that we want to do as well. So you get better focused responses on the submission. So that because the slides that were made of it, I think it's February we all review those, and that the districts that put the slides and the plan forward get a lot better responses and focus than the ones who don't know or can't tell.
Yeah, a forecast is helpful for sure, but I know you can't always forecast what's going to happen. We're getting some comments in the chat. Do you want to?
Yeah, Colonel Martin, you want to chime in on your comment?
I'm working. There we go. This laptop's pretty slow. I don't have much to add. I think the comment kind of speaks for itself, but we've had ICD 705 projects, especially up in the UK with F-35 bed down, multi-purpose hangar, and we're getting ready to award a monstrous intel complex. It's nothing but a giant skiff, and every one of them has been ripe with issues and challenges. A lot of it involving the overseas contractors not having experience. And on one project, it's been a case of where the host nation contractor didn't seek out or hire the right expertise needed to navigate the strict ICD 705 requirements. And it's never lost on us that a facility that fails to meet its certification is a failed facility. And we run the risk of spending lots of money for nothing if we're not careful. So that's been a big focus area. In some of my meetings, the questions have even been asked of, is it even possible to do ICD 705 projects OCONUS? And that's been asked at some very senior levels. Obviously, I think we can all agree based on the nature of our missions, we don't have a choice but to figure it out and get after it. And I know a couple contractors who have, blessed me with their visits in my office are starting to kind of get on board with that and are starting to offer some ICD 705 expertise to help drive success. So I think that's a great opportunity for some of the contractors in the room. It's definitely a niche market that needs to be paid attention to. Over.
Thank you.
Here is, we're obviously DoD, but Department of State has their overseas building, which they do a lot of classified construction as well. Within the industry, within SAMI, and the companies that participate, I would assume that the big companies, you guys have a lot of overlap between DoD and DOS.
Yeah.
Can that classified construction expertise, is it shared, or do you guys still find your project managers?
So we share where we can. So we have framework contracts for both, and particularly if it's stepping out OCONUS. Jacobs has a pretty big global footprint. I'm the guy in Europe for our federal business, and I said in Germany, but whenever we have work that comes in, we look to tie together the pieces of the company in different locations. For example, we're doing a F-16 bed down in Slovakia for NATO, and that was one where we happen to have a Slovakian office in a different part of the business, and the ability to actually go across the bounds of our business and figure out where we have people on the ground. So kind of back down to doing work OCONUS, having boots on the ground. It's a hard thing to replace that presence because it's actually knowing the rules, having people in the local requirements. But that's just a huge benefit to being able to do it. And to your question, we always try to look across the parts of the business. There are still stovepipes in our business, just like other businesses, I'm sure. Every A firm that I've worked for or worked with, we all kind of tend to silo, but it's certainly something whenever we can use that cross-pollination of information we do.
Trey had some comments and then Tom.
This is Trey Jordan. I'm currently with MC Dean, but I've spent about 5 years wearing uniform with EUCOM engineers and also about 6 years in the Army Corps of Engineers wearing uniform. And what I would encourage my private industry partners here to realize is, and this was my frustration when I was at EUCOM doesn't really have projects, and AFRICOM doesn't really have projects. They have to reach out to the services to try to work with them to get the execute projects. And what private industry is mostly interested in, of course, is chasing the contracts to get those projects. So what I would encourage us today to do is not necessarily focus on all the things about projects that we want out of DoD, although it's important to discuss. But it's kind of that second bullet there is what do EUCOM and AFRICOM need from SAME and private industry? And it's a very different paradigm than all these projects. I'm certain there's some projects in EUCOM, and for example, Poland, that EUCOM would really like to see get accomplished. And most of those, I think, are with U.S. Army Europe. There's some safety projects over there. But those are being done through the Army Corps of Engineers or the Polish Defense Department or AFCAC or whoever. And so I'd be curious to hear from the COCOMs, what is it that is really your concern from a professional engineer perspective? And I'm betting that it's not so much about how DoD interacts with private industry to get projects awarded and built, although we've asked some very good questions about how can we DoD do better. But I've seen so many SME events where we go down the road of this is what private industry would like better out of DoD, but I'm curious about what does EUCOM and AFRICOM really want out of us?
I'll throw one bullet out there. This is Gary Russ. Roles and responsibilities. Charisse, I think that, you asked earlier what SAME can do. There might be an event that would help all players know roles and responsibilities. Now, the challenge of that is they change dependent upon where you're at. You compare Poland and Romania, and it's night and day because obviously most of the construction's managed and done in Poland. But I think I could see that, who does what, when, and how can you get there? I get approached on doing construction like Trey was alluding to. I don't have anything to do with the construction. I don't care about management of the project. I care, but intimately I don't care. And I don't have the time or bandwidth to manage it. I throw them back at the service component to go fix it and work their way through examples and all that kind of stuff, where it's obviously completely different in Poland.
It is.
And I guess I would put out there just, often the government, this is Jennifer, of course, often the government does, kind of the initial planning in that piece themselves, although sometimes it gets contracted out. And I'll use without naming exactly what I'm working on, but, if we contract out the planning piece, the thing that I would ask for is making sure that you're appropriately staffing that initial planning with the people that have the experience and the expertise to do the critical thinking of 15 years down the road when this is actually implemented. What are all the obstacles and hurdles that are going to need to be attacked? Rather than, hey, this is so far down the road, I'm going to not really completely think this through. And, on the surface, it looks okay, but as you dig into the details, you start to find there's lots of holes. Making sure that, if you do work on a plan for the government, you take the time, use the experienced people to make sure that it's really critically thought through, because if we're subcontracting or if we're contracting something like that out, it's because we either don't have the capacity or the expertise to do it. And if we don't have the expertise to do it, we probably don't have the expertise to truly QC it. Which means we're really relying on you to make sure you're giving a quality product back to us. If we don't have the capacity to do it, we probably don't have the time to do a critical review and give you the feedback that you really need to give us quality back. So, you know, I would go back and say, make sure you have a robust QC program, make sure you've got senior people looking at these plans, because what might end up happening is we do a plan, then 2 years later, a scope of work is getting generated from it, and you're wondering why the scope of work is 2 sentences. Well, it's because it's pulled from the plan that didn't have as much thought put into it as it should have. And so, you know, really paying attention to that. You know, and that is in my mind at the moment, because I'm looking at a couple plans where that's going to be my feedback back to, you know, the consultant is, you know, hey, I need you to go back and take another look at this.
That's good. Good feedback.
We'll start with the 3091 basically. You really have to have a robust 3091 that really think through, as you said, especially because most of the construction occurs many years later after the, I mean, even the price component of 3091 could be valid, you know, in 2023, and now considering inflation, something that has been developed 5 years ago, now it's totally gone out of scale.
Yeah.
Scope. So that's a big point.
Tom Heeson, you get your hand up.
Yeah. Just circling back to Colonel Martin's comment on the ICD 705 project Seconus, and yeah, with my F-35 hat on, I definitely yes, see your points there. I was just going to note for the UK post, Matt Scrivener, who's actually recently joined the AFIMSC team in the UK, arranged what I thought was a really excellent session on ICD 705 construction in the UK. So I believe that's available on the UK Post website, but that's a good resource that I'd suggest would be relevant to all the European SAME posts. So I just wanted to highlight that. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. And that is one of the things that if you're a member of one of the Europe posts, we do send out a news flash. And if, you know, I mean, if I know Gary shares it, you know, around here, but there's always, I'm author of this, but I always have a section in there in case you missed it, and that's the links to the recordings. And so the session that Tom just referenced was the secure facilities design and construction. It was focused primarily on the UK, but they didn't name names.
Teresa, this is Lieutenant Colonel John Cunningham from Africa Command. I was throwing to maybe the other combat command perspective. And I think you got to echo your comments on the service components that really are design and construction agents, USACE and NAVFAC are the ones executing projects. So just understanding that helps interact with the combatant command. I think from our perspective, some of the trends we see in Africa are, you know, there's always the tyranny of distance and the distribution challenges of getting material there. And then there's a lot of diplomatic tax exoneration and customs issues when you get to construction. So we understand there are logistics challenges that drives costs and, you know, really lateness more often than not. How can we maybe better tackle some of those things? I think some of the issues we're seeing, I'll use East Africa as an example, strong drives from the host nation towards local labor. And there's a lot of benefits to using local labor if you're going to do where there's technical capability there, where there's opportunities to do that. Where you can't do that, sometimes you get into a political impasse, and DOD is doing all we can, but we just can't get there from here in some cases. So we understand those challenges. You've had some pretty high level OSD engagements on some of those issues in the last few weeks, even with industry. But I would just say foot stomping and encouraging local labor where you can, locally procured materials would really help. A lot of the projects that we see, we drive requirements at combat commands, not the J4 where I sit, but the J3, J5 drive requirements. But you're going to see, you know, the continued, you small scale, PKO, humanitarian assistance projects. Those are going to be the volume of projects. Running through USACE, more often than not at NAPBAC. And then you're going to see on the MILCON side, very sparse MILCON. But when we get them, we got to get them done. And they're going to be like airfield capacity type things. Runway repair, O&M type projects, not so much MILCON. But again, I just got to say that we understand the challenges of getting stuff done there. And one of the Navy's contract vehicle, WEXMAC, one of their mantras is kind of that locally sourced, kind of locally driven. I think that probably works really well on the continent where it can work, but the expertise is going to have to come from the big companies like they're doing the designs and so anyway, just AFRICOM perspective.
Thank you. Now, so you understand how to get it done, and you're depending on your execution agents, USACE and NAFAC. Do they understand how to get it done? Do you, or is there an opportunity to have a dialogue with industry, your execution agent, and the combatant command?
Hey, this AFRICOM again. So most of our components. Most all our components are dual hatted, in some cases triple hatted. You get to some of the Navy sub component level stuff. So you're talking to all the AFRICOM people when you're talking to the Europe people. In most instances, Europe district manages most of the humanitarian stuff. For USACE, the NAPBAC out of Naples is running a lot of that stuff. It's their expeditionary business line. So I mean, we're all talking. We did the Stuttgart here with EUCOM. So I think the engagements are happening. Like the JETC, it may be one that you're not plugged into as construction folks, but the challenges of getting stuff there are really real, and having those conversations. Us getting industry feedback at the joint EUCOM AFRICOM Joint Distribution Conference is one industry thing I can think of. But yeah, it was a kind of a not meant to be a flip answer, but really I think it's one happy family, and we're kind of a little brother in Stuttgart in terms of requirements driving construction. So for what that's worth.
That's good. So you're all talking to each other.
Oh, absolutely.
That's a good thing.
But I think more to your question is the Corps of Engineers and the NAVFAC guys have, because we don't, as he alluded earlier, don't have the bandwidth or capability to think about it completely. Those guys have to be, they're critical. Sometimes they're, a guy that just PCS'd in, so they didn't necessarily have the experience or exposure, and it takes them a little while to get it, but that process.
One observation that I have, well, probably all of us on the industry side that have been here for a long time, see this rotational nature. So you just got here a month ago and had no idea how you were going to get that project in Romania done. And so there's a learning curve on the government execution side, with the Corps or with NAPBAC. And so I think that your industry partners, are a help there, because we've been established here. We've got partners in the country. But yeah, I think sometimes there's a challenge when just because of the rotational nature of the government people. So, just my observation.
Host station doesn't like it either.
The rotational nature.
Yeah.
That you were saying, what could the government do better? Yeah, I think there's this continuity when you're dealing with the MODs that, I think that's your point's taken, Gary. Yeah. So, anybody else online?
Yeah, I think, so this is Lieutenant Colonel Starksville at EUCOM. At a real macro level, some of the challenges we've been dealing with, and I apologize, I haven't been to one of these events before. I'm not sure how much you guys are tracking this, might be tracking all of this, but there are several problem sets that we are struggling with. We're trying to think of how we're going to get out of it. One of them is energy resilience and security. And Gary, I don't know if energy resilience and security. So we have undertaken many different planning studies regarding energy independence from Russian energy, and most of that sits at the installation level. Obviously, because the Army and the Navy and the Air Force are the ones that manage the contracts that provide energy for those installations. We don't have an energy person dedicated here at EUCOM staff yet. We're working on that. Gary wishes Gary and Matt both wish they could get out of the business of energy, and that's all going to be successful here pretty soon. But I think if any of your organizations, or if you know people who are interested in that, I think we do have an outbrief in September in Rome related to some of the studies that the Corps of Engineers has done on how the installations are managing that. So that's one thing we definitely have going on right now. Another is vendor security. So you get, many of your organizations manage subcontractors that, and I don't understand intimately how you guys, or especially for sensitive projects, how you guys handle that. I know there's probably some type of agreement under the bilateral agreement that helps manage that relationship. But we have challenges with especially the sensitive projects. How do we vet the contractors, make sure that we're getting the right people?
Right. Getting the TAAs in place and so on.
Right.
Yeah, that's. Yeah.
And then I think the other, from the J4 perspective, and John brought up JETC. If you have gone to JETC, you'll know, but infrastructure, the transportation capacity is a real concern with us. So you can't move the military equipment you need to along the same routes that we use right now. Because not in all locations. Yeah, so 10T, is the European Union's effort to get after that. The problem is the European Union is to fund it more, because they've already burned through a lot of their funding that they initially allocated. So that's one thing from a big picture logistics perspective. We not only encourage the national governments and the EU and NATO to fund those projects and prioritize them the right way, but also, like, where do you start in such a big problem? So bridges, probably, the tunnels, widening of tunnels, rail gauge. But those are like, I don't know a whole lot about the micro level, but that's kind of at the macro level at the J4 is working through.
On the energy resiliency, the RCIP Huntsville just contracted and they're being reviewed to do the RCIP worldwide. And then Louisville's gonna play custodian of that. Do you see you guys using that contract mechanism when it comes out, or do you think you'll do your own? Corps of Engineers Huntsville got the RCIP.
So whenever possible, I think we try to leverage the existing tools that, like, NASDAQ and USACE have, but I don't know enough about how the installations manage their contracts.
If I could probably jump in, because that's kind of what I was talking about before, what private industry is interested in, right? The DoD, the COCOMs really don't have an operating budget to go out, so they work through whoever NAVFAC. So while they're interested in energy resiliency, whatever you want to call it, they don't have any funds, and they have to go ask the component to go ahead and do this. Now, I know there's an energy study going on. I think you just briefed it. There's a member of Corps of Engineers, verdict, doctor, somebody was over here. You has been over here a couple times, and he's well known. That got to focus on whatever DoD directive is coming down, the presidential directive is coming down, right? But the COCOM can't actually implement that directive. And so what I think they're all interested in, this is me just guessing, putting my old hat back on, is, you know, what are the potential possibilities, the outcomes, and what does private industry see as potential outcomes? I was involved with contingency planning when I wore a uniform way back when. And one of my issues was, before AFRICOM stood up, you know, hey, if we do have to do something in the continent, how do we open up a port? And so there was something, you know, in one of our big plans, and it was very, but I would have loved to have known from private industry perspective, well, these are the kinds of challenges you would face, and this is an approximate cost, because you know, as soon as you're going to have to go do a real world mission, the coffers are going to open up and somebody's going to start funding, and it'll still go down through the Army or the Navy or the Air Force. But as a planner, I would have loved to know, yeah, it's going to take $1 to open up a port, or $1 million, or these are the kind of difficulties that you private industry are worried about, which would help me understand, because the military capacity to open a port is only so big. And then we have to go out to private industry. The answer, he can't answer your question about, are you going to use a contract vehicle? Because they're probably never going to use it. They're going to turn to whoever.
Yeah, they'll have the requirement, the garrison or the base.
Yeah.
As the need, they'll go to the Corps, who will either use the Huntsville contract, or they'll do it through your district under one of those contracts.
This, for those virtual lands, this is technical map veracity here at the EUCOM JPOR report. So the energy kind of time where we're at right now. So DoD is developing energy strategy, right? Operational energy. We feel though in Europe, it's not really operational energy. That stuff that gets you to a wartime is an except for the installation kind of energy. We feel like it's kind of all one and the same. You know, the Air Force is a good example of, you know, the bases they fight from is also the operational base to go to war. And so we are kind of in the early process of an energy strategy, and then that would in turn kind of give some guidance to the components on where we want to kind of take and see things in the future, kind of an end state for that. And that could then maybe help direct EURSIP and kind of giving some limits on where that should go. If you ask me today, because, you know, a lot of money in EURSIP, if you ask me, you know, what are all the projects that are going on in Europe for EURSIP? I have no idea. Actually,
No.
you do. Nobody does. I don't. And this is probably a little bit of black hole from a EUCOM standpoint, but I would need to make some phone calls and figure it out. I could get an answer, but I feel like, you know, the combatant command should be giving some of that guidance to the services that are putting the money in a place that will collectively bring benefit to what we're doing here. So that's kind of where the energy standpoint's coming out.
That might be a good topic, you know, or an event where we can talk about potentially what is the energy. You know, you said you're putting the energy strategy together. The challenge here, of course, is you don't own the bases. You've got to buy your utilities off. I mean, and then the host nations are imposing requirements that, you know, some of these bases can't support. So, you know, that might make a good industry government engagement roundtable discussion. I'll take that away. I don't want to stop the dialogue. We're scheduled to go till 2, but there was I think one other point on the slides here that we wanted to do. If somebody can flip to the next slide, and then we'll go back to more discussion, because this is really what we think. This is really what we wanted to do. Is, you know, what we wanted to do was talk about SAME. Fortunately, pretty much here everybody is a member, but if you want to take some of these back to your office, the value of membership, I've got these here. You can sign up online. We've got the link there. Again, I don't want to take any of these home, so if you want some of these sessions, I do want to offer that, you know, this whole event came about as the fact that you guys couldn't send anybody to JETC, and there are a ton of topics. Everything we've talked about in here, there was a session on at JETC. So I made a deal with SAME National, and if you are an SAME member, you can have access. Where's the catalog going around still? Yeah, you $30, if you're a member, you can get access to every presentation and recording with a special login and password. If you're a non-member, the cost is $50. This is a one-time offer, but wait. No, this is the special offer because you guys are remote and didn't have the opportunity, and so I made a deal with them. So if you're interested in that, take my card, send me an email, and I will get you the login information. I'll leave those here. Chandler.
Just adding on to that, since a lot of people in the room here and probably online are already SAME members, everybody moves around. Always think about, hey, should I update where I'm affiliated as a member? It's not really front of mind. But if you do go to the SAME website, log in as your own personal account, pick the chapter or post that you want to affiliate with. So obviously we treat Europe as a region. So generally, if you're on any of those rosters and you opt in to receive emails, that's important. If you don't want to get information, opt out. But obviously, the way we communicate with people most effectively is through the newsletter that we send out. So you have to actually go into your account through SAME.org and opt in with a working email address. And we're happy to send everybody the email announcements. We try to keep it to 2 a month. So we do one in the beginning of the month and one in the middle, unless there's something that's evolving and we want to make sure people are aware, because people don't always go think to go to the website for a regular basis.
So membership is $55 for a year. And then of course, if you're a young professional, which is pretty much all you guys, it's only $40 per year. And then it's $10 to add an additional post. Now, if you're here in Europe and you align with the Rhein-Main post, which is sort of Army focused, or the Kaiserslautern post, which is sort of Air Force focused, or the UK post, which is very unique, you will get the monthly news flash. If your name is on a roster, we send communication out, you'll apply. So, would encourage you to do that. Sign up. And that was, if you flip to the last slide.
I was gonna say, I don't think we have a young member in here, but then
one walked in. I know he is. Although, no, I'm not gonna say it. Never mind. All right. So I know some people had a hard stop at 1, but but we did book till 2. So this has been very excellent discussion. I'd like to continue. If there's any other comments or points, any hands raised in the online gallery?
Hi, Charisse. This is Britta.
Yes.
Can you hear me? Hi.
Yes, we can. Thanks.
I'm sorry. I got kicked off of the virtual meeting, and so I'm just calling in. I can't see if anybody's hands are raised. I don't know if you mentioned this at the very beginning. I apologize. It's been a long day. Anyway, I was a little late getting on. Did you happen to mention our STEM scholarship winner is from Stuttgart? And
I did mention that.
Okay.
So I know that
great.
Stuttgart has a really robust STEM program, but it's not associated with SAME. And Britta runs the STEM and scholarship program for the Rhein-Main post. So we connected her with the Stuttgart High School. And we got an applicant, excellent application, and awarded a scholarship.
Yep.
Who was it?
Who was it, Britta?
It's Isabella Singleton, who is absolutely amazing on paper. So one day maybe I can meet up with her and have lunch, because I think it would be the most impressive conversation. She was at Stuttgart High a very short time, but in that amount of time, apparently had a pretty significant impact on the STEM program, as well as the Honor Society program. And she has a full ride to Columbia University, where she'll be starting in the fall and getting her degree in aerospace engineering.
The Food Foundation, if that's their school there.
Yeah. So, I mean, we would like to invite presentation at some point back to the region.
We did have one other comment in the chat from Tim Smith asking how do we get more enlisted engineers involved with SAME? I think the most obvious thing is bring a friend. You know, obviously we tried to encourage people to come to this. You know, that's the best opportunity is everybody, you know, encourage people to join, share the newsletter. If you get the newsletter, come join face to face whenever you can.
I think one of our stars is Adam Bubinev. He's still on. I mean, he not only brings a friend every time, but he gets them to volunteer for board positions. I think, Adam, do you want to comment on anything? If you drop. What I want to say is, I mean, we're all sitting here in the room. This is great. This is the way I like to do a meeting. But you can see we also have a lot of people joining virtually. So while we won't have monthly meetings here in Stuttgart, we can come as often as you invite us, but you can also join our other events online. All posts have monthly events and they do hybrid.
Where's the calendar invite? Who's that go to?
So the invite depends on who's hosting the meeting. So I do, like this one is my invite. And the way we try to do it is we actually send out the ICS file. So we do it, obviously, when we send out the newsletter or the news, either the event flash or the news flash, if we have the details worked out for that, we send it as soon as we can. That's a attachment to the file that you can add to Outlook, and it'll put it with the information to join virtually, but also the details if you want to come in person.
So it's critical that in your some profile on the same website and email address, opt in.
I'm still associated with my old, post, I'm sure.
So that's easy. All you have to do is just switch it to one of the Europe posts, whichever one you like. So Chandler mentioned that we sometimes send information out multiple times a month. You know, we have the roster, and even if you're associated with Kaiserslautern, I'm just going to say that. Well, no, you probably associate with Rhein-Main, wouldn't you? You're our news. It doesn't matter. You know, we're one community of Europe. You know, we're not that big, so we will mass email everybody with the invites. As the website get new and improved and better, you can always log into the website and find information, how to sign up or where the Teams link would be. We're going through a technology challenge with National at the current time, but that is soon to be all worked out.
I was just going to say too, from the COCOM perspective, like I said earlier, while just out in 20 minutes or so, sitting in on the different sites you kind of deal, primarily Army or primarily Air Force. From the COCOM perspective, we're dealing with on a daily and weekly basis with the engineers at USU or OSN, or with A4C, or with the Navy down in Naples, right? So we're all over the place and we're well represented here. It's small staff, but well represented with all the different components also. So it's good for us to be on all those mailing lists.
I want to clarify that comment. When I say it's Army focused or Air Force focused, that just means that that's the majority of the membership.
Yeah.
The topics are everything.
And we do, as we work to, again, kind of bring together the region, we try to deconflict. So generally we try to do it where we don't have the meetings the same week. Yeah. We don't always, we're not always successful based on arranging a venue and being able to work the details. But the goal is to have it where generally once, 3 weeks out of the month, there's probably a SAME meeting with a presentation. If we have the time over lunch, good opportunity.
Thank you.
Well, so we can go back to just talking about whatever's on your mind.
Yeah, I'll be quiet.
Thank you so much for your help.
Thank you. One of the EUCOM exercises involved trying to figure out how to logistically operate and move in Eastern Europe. And one of the concerns was the bridge networks couldn't necessarily support moving tanks, right? I think it was SDME Europe held an event down in Italy, and some of the presentations were on how to do bridge repairs or temporary bridging. The presentations were more about the actual projects themselves, but from a COCOM perspective, I think the concern was more about what stocks do we have in theater, how long would it take to get there. And so Trey's opinion, again, is solely my opinion, is what SME can do and private industry can do is help better understand what your problems are and how to solve them in general, not necessarily the project specific, how do we build a bridge and how do we prepare the near bank, the far bank, and what set do we use. And what I would encourage those who are in the uniform today or the UD civilians is help outline what your problems are to the degree you can in the secret classified world of this is what we'd like private industry to help us understand our day-to-day jobs here in Stuttgart as we operate on these two COCOM staffs. And it's not sexy in terms of what SME normally does because it's not project focused. It's not, the dollars aren't flowing, the project, you're not seeing something come up out of the ground or design appearing from scratch paper to 100% design. But it is what I think the COCOMs need, and it is what private industry can do, and that's one of SME's missions. So I think in the end, it comes around to the actual projects eventually. But it's got to start, and I've watched this problem now for almost 20 years here in Stuttgart. What do these people in uniform need? What can industry provide? And I think that's one of the reasons why the Stuttgart chapter post kind of disappeared. Is the interest is in where all the projects are. The projects are up at Europe District there in Wiesbaden and up at NAVCAC and NAVFAC and up there in the UK, tons of stuff going on right now with construction. And as a result, this chapter disappeared. And I do like now we had COVID that we can do virtual stuff and it's a little bit easier. And I'm glad we're talking about that today because now perhaps some more people will dial in and get on the email list. But I think that's where Trey's opinion again is where this, whatever you want to call it, outpost effort needs to go with SAME.
The requirements to stand up a field chapter are very small. I need 2 people.
I looked at it.
I'm looking at one of them.
Well, I thought about it about 10 years ago. And the problem is these guys all have day jobs. Right?
That is the problem, Trey. I understand.
And then getting people, private industry on the base,
right.
Signing them on the base.
Thank you.
It's a lot easier.
So, I mean, that's, and that's what my role is with the European region is, we don't want to forget about you. You're actually more important than just the projects that are going on because this is where they get generated.
And you say that the requirements are small, you can be 2 people, but you're looking at half of our staff. The EUCOM, the theater engineer is an 06 with 7 full-timers.
That's it. I know.
We have some other folks that work alongside us, but full-timers that work directly for EUCOM.
Well, they don't have to be government. They can,
right.
They can get your industry partners.
Just people don't think through that, and I didn't before I got here, 3 years ago, that EUCOM staff for engineering is not big. We're working, like I said, daily, weekly basis with the engineers at the.
Well, I mean, if you see the value in having events like this, then we'll come back. Or you can join us virtually.
Reach out to me because when I tried 5, 6, 7 years ago, there wasn't much interest in DPW, Research Resident Engineer Office, the COCOM engineers. There just wasn't much interest. So I said, well.
Right. It's a good excuse for us to day trip. It's easy day trip like you all did,
Yeah.
And we can go visit the people we talk to all the time at USACE or at USACE.
Right. Well, we do, SAME does, support and other additional events. You mentioned the event down in Italy that was in 2019. It was a tri-service event. there's going to be one next spring, and so I'm working with the organizers on that. So, we don't have any details yet. We don't even know where yet. But, and we used to rotate them here in Stuttgart. It was EUCOM would host it, or AFRICOM would, and SAME would come in and do all the logistics. We'd get the technical presentations. We did one last year at Clankerson, Africa. It was the AFRICOM conference, but it was still pandemic days then, and so the in-person component of it was somewhat limited. So there are those types of events that'll be annual or semi-annual. So, did all of you guys sign in on the sign-in sheet? Because I will make sure that I reach back to you. You've got your email address on there and everything. I'll make sure I reach back to you.
Anyone needs a
PDF. Yeah.
I'll sign in. I'll sign in, then you have to fill the rest.
One for you, one for you, one for you, one for you.
Definitely the other end. Yeah. Sam.
Just sign it.
Oh, yeah.
We'll trust that you can fill out the other information yourself, like today's date.
That's neat.
Gotta get running before I get going. Yeah, thank you. Good to meet you.
Or helping with coordinate access.
I know it was a little bit of a challenge, so apologize.
Appreciate
Been all
it.
over. And yeah, thank you. Good to meet you all.
Have a good one here.
Good
luck with the energy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Good to meet you.
Yeah, thanks. That goes well. This emergencies abound everywhere.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Good to meet you.
Yeah. Well. Yeah, I think Ed's gonna stay here. Ed Chalk is gonna stay. He comes.
Right. So